I was born in Buffalo, New York, and lived there until I was 10 years old. And then we moved to Boston. My mom's family, her sisters, were in Boston, and so we moved to Boston after the death of my older sister, and who died in Buffalo. And my mom decided she wanted to relocate and to be with family. My mother was an extraordinary woman. We grew up poor, but I never knew that we were poor, and because she was very cultured. And so as a child, I, was taken to museums and theater and to hear music, and we would go to the Boston Pops, and we always had a lovely home. My mother always kept a lovely home, and she was a writer, but it was more or less a pastime for her, a meditation for her. She wrote beautiful poetry, and so I grew up knowing a lot about poetry and hearing her poetry, but also the poetry of the Harlem Renaissance writers. So I grew up on Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen and those luminaries during the Harlem Renaissance time, because those were my mother's favorite people, and she read a lot. And those were the books that we had in our home all the time. And we always had black magazines, on the coffee table. So I grew up with a sense of pride of being, an African American, Negro at that time. So I think that informed my work as an adult, because of my mother's writing and playwriting and the exposure. And my mother was in her 60s when she decided to go to college. She had never been to college, and to study playwriting. And she went to Boston University, and then a whole new world opened for her and for me, because she made sure that she brought me into that world with her. And so we continued going to plays and, just meeting the Boston artists, and everybody loved her. She was the elder, and she had all these young people around her, and I feel like I'm falling in her footsteps because I work with a lot of young people, young artists. So anyway, I left Boston in 1978. I was a single mom. My son and I moved up here. He was 8 years old, and we didn't know anyone, but I needed to get out of the city, get my child into a better school system, and so we came to Amherst, and sight unseen almost, But I just heard about, the Che Lumumba School for Truth at UMass, that was part of the Pan African Institute, which is New Africa House, and all these amazing musicians and artists were professors there, and so it just sounded like a place that I wanted to be, and I wanted my son to be. And of course, the year that we moved here was the year that Che Lumumba closed, so he went into the Amherst public school system, which wasn't that bad. But anyway, I was not into theater as a practitioner at that time. I loved going to the theater. My mother was a playwright. I would go to see, her plays, and but I was not really interested in going into theater. My thing was art therapy, so I studied art and psychotherapy at Boston University before I moved here. And I came here actually, I had found a job up this way at Belchertown State School to run an art therapy program. And then that fell apart. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to stay. I'm going to move to Amherst, put my kid in a better school system, and things will open up for me. I've always been a creative. I've always been curious, and trying new things. So I said, I'm sure I'll be fine, So I started just engaging with local artists, and I met Patty O'Neill, who ended up becoming my very best friend. She's an amazing dancer and choreographer. After meeting Patty, I also joined a women's theater company called Women's Community Theater. And why I joined that was I just felt like I needed to meet more people and I wanted to do something interesting. So I was always, like going through the newspapers and finding a class to take or a workshop to go to. So I said, let me check this out. And they had put an ad in the Amherst Bulletin that they were looking for a stage manager. I knew nothing about theater in that sense. I knew plays. I loved going to see plays, but I never knew how theater worked. And so I called them and I says, listen, I saw your ad in the paper. You're looking for a stage manager. I'd like to apply. And so it was at Munson Library. So I went over to Munson Library. They were having a meeting. And I introduced myself and I walked into the room. And it was a room full of white lesbian women. And I'm a black heterosexual woman. So I walked in. And we both kind of like looked at each other and said, oh, hi, And so they said, are you Ingrid? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, great. We want to hear about your experiences, in theater and your, background as a stage manager. And I says, well, there's not much to tell. I like going to theater. I know nothing about stage managing, but I feel like I need to learn a new skill. I said, so if you have me, I'm a quick learner. And my dear friend Eileen Stewart was one of the women, and I didn't know her then, of course, and she was like, let's try her out. And we hit it off like that. I stayed with that company for 5 years. And I ended up learning how to be a stage manager, a producer, and that's when I first began acting. I got my first acting role. With them, I was kind of pushed into it as most stage managers are. Somebody can't make the show and the show must go on, and the stage manager, who knows everybody's lines, gets pushed onto the stage. And it was a comedy. And I decided, okay, I'm going to try it out. And it was slapstick comedy with pratfalls and everything. And I did it and I loved it and I had a ball. In rehearsals, it was like, oh my God, I can't wait to get to the next rehearsal. This is fun. Acting is actually fun, And then when the opening night, I got so many laughs and people loved it. And that's when the bug bit me. I was like, uh-oh, I like this. I think I want to be on this side. And not backstage. I want to be out front. And so after that, I started performing and producing a lot of their shows. And then I started working with, that's when I started working with Patty. Patty and I had become friends, but I wasn't doing any work with her. And then I just started using other people's writings, like poetry and prose. And Patty would create dance pieces to it. And we created a body of work over a span of about 12 or 13 years. Actually, up until she passed away, Yeah, I miss her. Yeah, we became really good friends. I mean, we were artists together. We were colleagues, but we were also like sisters. Her daughter and my son became good friends, and they were the same age, went to school together, and we did a lot of family stuff together, and she was just a great person. Also during that time, I met Gregory Dean Smith, also known as AKA Smitty, and he was in a production of The Healing of Sugar by Carlos Anderson, and I went to see that show. First of all, it was an amazing production. Carlos is a gifted actor, playwright, performer, and Gregory Dean Smith was in that play, and I was mesmerized by his character. I mean, he was believable, and he was a young man playing an elder, playing an old man. And, sometimes you go and you see a young person playing an old person and it doesn't work. His worked. I believe that he was old. I didn't realize that he wasn't old until he came off stage and out of makeup. And I was like, wow, And I can't tell you when we really became friends and colleagues, but I know I would go to see him in different productions at UMass, and or in the community, and doing work with Carlos, and I would always go and see what he was up to, what productions he was in. And then when I decided to go back to school and study theater, because now the bug had bitten me from women's community theater and working with Patty, I decided to go to UMass and study theater in the theater department. And then so part of my studies, one of my courses was directing, and I fell in love with directing, and so I started directing short plays, like one acts, and I would call Smitty in, and say, I'm doing this project. You want to, play this role for me? And then he and I became friends. Then we became like family, So yeah, that was my first beginnings of getting to know Gregory Dean Smith, aka now Brother North Star.